What you see here and what I've tried to divide are the film into different types of generations we have. That is, we sometimes try or think that the negative is just one thing. It's a magical entity that encompasses the entire film. The negative or the camera negative was the first step, and unfortunately, that is what we are least likely to see in a non-industrial, non-professional environment. Probably the only people who have access to a camera negative are the big studios like Universal, Paramount, or something like that, or the director who has kept the negatives at home. That's always what gets left aside. No, especially in countries like Peru, which didn't have the complete logistics. They often had to send their film to labs abroad. So it's very difficult for this material to even exist in our local context, of course. So the first thing we have is the negative. Now, what you see in the negative there on the left is the image we capture. The right side is when we flip the image. It's captured like that. Literally, the negative is a negative image. So it's like that with the colors inverted. You can see the CMYK and the RGB are reversed. So now, to enhance the visualization, I made that small adjustment you see on the right, which is just a LUT, but this is what we have. The highest possible quality of the image. It's the first generation, and it's something you have never seen in theaters. You've never seen this in theaters. No one has ever projected this for you. It doesn't exist in reality, because if you want to emulate the look of a film, you will never have this or ever see it. And now let's move on to the next one, which is what we've almost always had, which is the interpositive. Now, the interpositive was the copy that was made. What happens when we have a negative and another negative? Positive.
Exactly. Like
and this interpositive was the backup copy always made from any camera negative. Sometimes the final edit was done on the camera negative, and in some cases when there wasn't enough money or the workflow wasn't sufficient, or depending on the location, it was done on the interpositive. There was a loss. Anyway, if you compare the image on the left with the image on the right, there is more grain, it's slightly less defined, and the contrast and color have changed slightly, and that is just a change from a first generation. Now, what happens if we have finished our editing process? Are we ready? Have we assembled our AV reel in the case of 16? Are we ready to just add the audio? Then we have what is called the internegative. In other words, the negative is another generation. The internegative is what you will see most often when there are remasters. When there are releases on Netflix, all these, because this already has the edit done, it probably has a color intention. It is the product, we could say, closest to being ready to be finalized. And this is probably what we've most often seen on any platform. You can see the difference between the original and the internegative. The grain is much larger. The contrast and obviously the color start to change a bit. And I've been quite gentle with these changes because it depends on the stock, the lens, and the material. The difference can be much larger.
Perfect.
And if we consider what we have in Peru and Latin America, it is the exhibition print. The exhibition print that you're looking at here is already the most common thing we've had. The contrast is totally different.
I did go out quite a bit.
Much information has been lost, especially in the highlights and some parts of the shadows. The grain is very evident. It's not like the slight grain we get sometimes. It's a very pronounced grain. So when we talk about the filmic look, often we're actually referring to the exhibition positive rather than the camera negative. But this is what we've seen. If we've gone to see Jurassic Park, if we've gone to see The Mummy, if we've gone to see any movie from the 90s, whatever it is, we have seen the exhibition print. So clarifying that, we need to see what processes we must follow, more or less, depending on the damage that has been done or how the material has been preserved. I would say in 90% of the cases when I work with material from here in Latin America or Peru, it's exhibition positive. Very rarely have I received internegatives. And that's because there were places like Cinecolor in Argentina where they had negative cutters working on this. So there you might receive internegatives, but most of the time you will receive exhibition positives. Right, exactly.
Those elements arrive And from there, well, what is the next step?
Here I have a small demonstration so you can see the biggest difference between the internegative
big
and the
enough to
release
see.
print. Yes, pardon me. And you can see
Oh,
to the left
is it the same movie?
than the right, but it is a previous generation. And this is all the change that can occur and all the damage that can be done. Imagine all that amount of information that is being lost, right?
Of
If
course.
we analyze the 3 channels, I love working with the channels. This is the red channel, this is the green channel, and this is the blue channel. We see the difference in how many have been damaged. In the case of the green channel, it's the
you
one
can
that
tell.
gets damaged the least. It's the
It's
nature of
expensive.
how the film is composed. The red channel and the blue channel are the ones that suffer the most damage. The blue channel, or rather the yellow splice, always has some form of damage. Of course, that's interesting. And you receive the positive. And as for me, I would say I'll always get the positive. Go ahead. Yes. No. All right. I think it's a good example of how we receive the material from others. It's a very particular case of a film where there was the internegative and the exhibition print, and you have to restore the distribution print. Imagine this part 2. The damage that occurs in the distribution print is very noticeable. Now, one thing you must be very clear about is that distribution prints were disposable. The major distributors thought every movie that went to a cinema had about 10, 20 showings, whatever, and after that, people moved on, and then it was thrown away. So it was never thought that the exhibition print would be preserved. In other words, if you are considering preservation, you preserve the internegative, the interpositive, the camera negative, but you never thought anyone would preserve the exhibition print, and that's why it always has these problems. I mean, it's due to the nature of the material. It was degradable. Of course,
Thinking
it
about
was
that.
a material.
A short duration. When
It was the H.265 of its time, the H.264 more or less. And we still keep storing H.264. Yes, it makes me very sad when I see film festivals still receiving H.264. I mean, what preservation effort is there if we're still doing
now
the same
comes, I
thing?
imagine, the capture
Well, good
process,
comparison.
right? Yes.
Super. So at this moment, we have seen Well, first I wanted to show you what happens if, on top of all those processes we have, what happens
Yes.
if we add subtitles? What happens if we add elements? What happens if we add art to
from
it?
above.
I mean, you see more damage
Hello?
being done because with the optical printer, you had to run one more roll. Once again, the film with the mate, with the film, with the gap, and you had at least two more generations, so the film was damaged more. And this is the internegative.
Okay.
What happened if you
Let's
didn't
see.
print? Much more damage.
Of course, definitely.
And the color changes more, so there's more damage and more change. Well, at that time it was very convenient for people doing special effects because the amount of grain helped them compose the elements better too. But well, that's up to each person. And I want to show you a final comparison. What happens? It's simply the same film in internegative. The only difference is that one has subtitles and the other does not, okay? It was filmed in the same place with the same camera. It's the same reel, but one has the titles and the other doesn't. And if we start analyzing the channels, look, the red channel, look, full of grain, full of noise.
The
The
work
green
is
is more or less the same. And the blue is almost destroyed. The blue didn't make it, practically didn't make it. And that's what happens.